This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends. Hello and welcome to Evangelical. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. If you're a new listener that's recently subscribed after the CBS documentary that was released on December 2nd, welcome to the show. This episode is being released on Thursday, December 13th, 2018. And on that same day, a group of evangelicals will be meeting at Wheaton College for a summit. The title of that summit is Reflections, a GC2 summit on responding to sexual harassment, abuse, and violence. When this event was first advertised just a couple of months ago, it was done with the Church2 hashtag. Several prominent evangelicals were announced as speakers. Ed Stetzer, Beth Moore, Max Lucado, and Eugene Cho are just a small sample. But two names were conspicuously absent from the list of speakers: Emily Joy and Hannah Paasch, the two co-creators of the Church2 hashtag. And the reasons are pretty clear. As was recently reported by Emily McFarland Miller at Religion News Services, while the speakers come from diverse backgrounds, all still hold evangelical beliefs. And that's not to say Emily and Hannah don't have experience in evangelicalism. They do. Go back and listen to episode 10 of the show to hear that. No, they just don't have a vested interest in propagating evangelicalism. Furthermore, Emily and Hannah are no longer evangelical, are queer, and as such have been simply glossed over by the organizers of this summit. And that's not right. Thankfully, I spoke to Emily and Hannah last year shortly after Church2 began, and shortly after it began to send waves through the internet, and I'm re-releasing that conversation today. You can hear some of the story that Wheaton won't endorse, in the words of the women that started it. This is just one resource that's being made available today. Keep your eyes peeled on Twitter, Instagram, the Evangelical Facebook group, and elsewhere today for other statements and teachings from others about Church2. Okay, that's all the intro we need. You can connect with me on Twitter at brchastain. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts. You know the drill. But we've got work to do today. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, welcome back to Evangelical. I have with me today Hannah Paasch.
Hi.
And Emily Joy.
Hey, what's up?
Glad we could reconnect and talk about what you've been up to since we last talked. I spoke to you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I spoke to you last year, very early in the show. It was I think episode 10. So very early in the show, and we talked a lot about sort of your backgrounds, and at the time and still to this day, you talk a lot about purity culture and things like that. But you've also started this new hashtag, Church2, that we're going to talk about in detail. But first, before we really get into that, if we could just sort of, for the listener, establish your evangelical pedigree, so to speak.
I feel like I'm doing that every day on the internet now.
Yeah.
Retweeting myself. But no, that's totally fine. For those of you who maybe hadn't heard the previous episode that we were on, my name is Hannah Paasch. I grew up as a missionary kid, pastor's kid, and later became a missionary myself, went to seminary, dropped out of seminary, and was really raised within the non-denominational evangelical mega church system. So that's actually where Emily and I met. We met at Moody Bible Institute. I was attending Moody Theological Seminary, and Emily was coming into Moody Bible Institute, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yes. My dad was a Southern Baptist youth pastor when I was born. Over time, he started his own stateside missionary ministry. So I've been in just about every kind of church, Protestant church that you can possibly imagine. Then I went to Moody Bible Institute. I have a piece of paper on my wall from Moody Bible Institute saying that I am certified for Christian ministry.
You're living that out for sure.
I'm living it out.
Hashtag little
God.
did they know.
I do my poetry, I do my yoga, I teach Sunday school, I do all kinds of stuff. So there's been a lot of people in the last couple of weeks who have been like, well, these are just unbelievers, and I'm like, listen, friend, here's all the things. So those are the things.
Friend, I'm sure I have more books of the Bible memorized than you. Okay.
Hannah, you have more books of the Bible memorized than anyone. Let's be real.
Yeah, it's real. It's real. It doesn't go away.
Yeah. So, I mean, that, again, certainly check out the earlier episode, but a lot of times, that preface is really for people that automatically question you, because obviously you're doing some
a few of those.
Yeah, you're doing some very...
Several, in fact.
That's right. And we're going to get into that too. We're actually, if you want, we can start there, but I feel like we need to... let's also... I mean, Church 2 has been covered across the internet in a number of different news sites. And when I refer to Church 2, what I mean is the hashtag that Emily and Hannah started that addresses sexual assault and abuse within churches. And actually, before we sort of get into the negative reaction to this, if you could explain how this started, and then what the intent behind this campaign is, because I believe it was this from what I remember, it was. Emily, you shared a very vulnerable story, and then Hannah, you also brought that into your own timeline and brought it into that sort of perspective as well. But I just love to hear.
Yeah. So all of the things have been happening, right, with Hollywood and with Washington, and all of these powerful men have been sort of being, brought down a little bit by all of these accusations. And, I've kind of been sitting on my own story of what happened to me in the church for a long time, and trying to figure out, like, we all have that, like, mental filing cabinet, right? And I've always been trying to figure out, like, what filing cabinet does this story go in?
Mine a treasure chest.
Yeah.
Yes, I get
and so
you.
it's like, what do you do with this? And so there was one day a couple weeks ago where there was something like 3 other men in Hollywood throughout the day on Twitter had been accused, and I kind of just, like, got tired of it. And so I think it was on our group text, and I was like, should I, like, out my abuser? And it was a story I'd been wanting to tell for a really long time, but just, again, not really sure what category to put it in. And so, and it's so funny because it's like, I was literally, so it was on, like, a Monday night. And the next day I was, like, leaving at, like, 8 a.m. to go on an overnight trip with my husband, to go and, like, celebrate our 4-year anniversary. And so I was really trying to just get stuff over with. I was like, I'm going to go, and I'm going to, like, go on this trip and, like, totally check out and be with my husband and, like, go to Asheville and, like, have a beer and, like, be really chill and and then this thing happened. Right. So that night I told my story, and I tweeted all those things. And after I tweeted this whole thread of stuff, kind of telling my story, and I included, like, specific names. I named my abuser, I named the church. And other people started coming forward. There was a couple other women who started saying, like, hey, something like this happened to me. Here's my story. This is what happened, et cetera. And so, Hannah texted me, and she was like, I think that we need to, like, have some way to talk about this with people. And so we went back and forth, and we were like, well, what about a hashtag? And we kind of spitballed some things back and forth, and ultimately settled on Church Too, which obviously played us off of Me Too, which is the movement that was started a decade ago by Tarana Burke and then recently put into the media by Alyssa Milano. And then it just kind of went viral and everybody was telling their Me Too stories and all this stuff. And I was like, well, if we do Church Too, people are automatically going to know, like, that's what we're talking about, right? There's that like memory recall. So I was like, well, why don't you just tweet out her Church Too, and I'm going to go to bed and then get up in the morning and go to Asheville. And, you know, just do what you will with it, but just give it a shot. And so in that sense, I mean, number one, like in that sense, we're totally like indebted to like Tarana Burke, to Alyssa Milano, to everybody who has shared their stories on the Me Too tag, you know, like all of the women that have come forward to make us all brave.
Right.
But I kind of on the Church Too tag on that, I was like, you know, it'll be like tomorrow morning, like, you know, our dozen Twitter friends who love us will be like tweeting on it and blah, blah, blah. And it was like in the morning, it was sort of going viral. And then like 24 hours later, it was on Time. And I like woke up in the hotel with Billy, the morning after. And, you know, we were on this like romantic honeymoon trip and all this stuff. And I was like, hey, we're in Time magazine.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, so it like on the one hand, like it's kind of funny because it was definitely not intentional. But on the other hand, it's like, it's super sobering because it was just this thing where you're like, oh, we're just going to talk about, you know, these experiences that we've had that we've you know, some of our friends have had, and we've, you know, we all talk, but we didn't nearly expect it to have the reach that it did. And so when it started being a thing where it's like lots of other people that were participating in it, people we didn't know, people we'd never heard of, we started to realize, oh my God, like we have something here that is really, truly happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, for me, hearing Emily's story originally, like about a decade ago, was really sort of the thing that I think brought us together. It was the first like really vulnerable thing that she disclosed to me, and I knew that was hard for her. So I have had that story and those names and that church and like all of those things in my brain for about a decade, and felt very strongly about it, of course. And then when Emily posted the thread on Twitter, basically outing him, I remember I was walking into the movie theater to see something, and I couldn't even think about the movie. I was just in a world of like rage and emotion, and I had this sense that what was coming after this was big, and I felt that, you know, Emily and I have a modest reach on Twitter. I mean, I think we have enough people to talk to us on there, but we do all right. We've never started a viral hashtag before. But I had the sense that this was the kind of conversation that if it was able to gain the traction that it has, would blow up, because these stories are out there. You know, I've been hearing them for my entire adult and adolescent life. So, you know, I wasn't surprised by how many people came forward. I was glad and surprised that it took and that it gained the visibility that it needed to.
Mm-hmm. But it's such a weird feeling because it's like, you're so sad.
Mm-hmm.
It's so sad that all of this is the case, but you're also like, there's like this cathartic experience that's a part of it, of like, oh my God, I'm so glad we're saying this, and I'm so glad it's finally like these stories are getting the visibility that they deserve, that they've always deserved, that like people are understanding, but also like it's so sad. It's really a mixed bag of emotions.
But for me, it's kind of like, I've been sad. I have been sad for as long as I have been cognizant. And so, of course, it's sad, but at the same time, I feel this like very particular sense of vindication. Like, I'm not crazy. all like this great din of voices proves that we're not crazy, that purity culture does lead to rape culture.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it transpiring in congregations, and not even just Christian or evangelical congregations. I mean, I saw tags from India, tags from Egypt, like people who were saying that in religious contexts that there was a space for sexual harassment and abuse to occur. And I don't know, that makes a lot of sense to me, really.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, like taking traumatic things and putting them in the light, if it's something that you can do healthily and something that doesn't place you in harm's way, I mean, there is tremendous power in that.
Yeah.
And
Well, and I think that's an important side note too, is that like there's been a lot of people who have come forward and like said these things happened to them, or even, you know, straight up name their abusers, as I did. But there's people for whom that would put them in harm's way. And I think, you know, there's been a lot of conversation about, oh, are you naming specific people? Are you just talking about generals? And it's like, if you can and you want to, you should, but like,
if you are safe to.
Yeah, if you're safe to, there's a lot of reasons why you might not want to. There's a lot of like safety considerations depending on how like scary the person who abused you is. Like there's a lot of safety considerations to be had. So I don't know. I think that's always a really important caveat to make, is that like it is good to have that information out there, but also there's a lot of reasons why people can't specifically name their abusers, and that's also okay. Like you need to consider your personal safety.
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
I can certainly understand the degree to which seeing something like this succeed in the way in which it has can be completely conflicting, because I mean, this is something that's gained traction and has gotten attention because it's sort of, victims have been silenced either by the norms of churches or literally, or by their own. Yeah. I can't speak from experience, so I don't want to speak too much further on that without like putting my foot in my mouth. But
there's totally a variety of reasons why it happens.
Yeah. But you did mention that, you know, purity culture can lead into things like rape culture and other sorts of much more harmful things. For those that might not be familiar or haven't had this particular experience, because I think that is one of the sort of counterpoints that people try to bring up as well. This isn't my experience. If you could talk to a little bit, talk to that a little bit, as far as, well, these are the sorts of norms that can be very common within churches. These are the sorts of things that allow these horrendous events to happen.
Yeah, so I would say that, and this is something that Emily and I have honestly been trying to bring to light for a while, is that the root of sexual abuse and harassment in the church really is theological. It's not just something that happens in a vacuum and is then silenced.
Which it does happen. Like it does happen other places. It's like, sure. A lot of people's objections have been like, well, how do you explain this happening in like secular quote unquote environments, like, you know, Hollywood or Washington? It's like, it's not like sexual assault doesn't happen other places. Obviously it does. Right. There's a variety of contributing factors to the sexual.
Well, the patriarchy exists everywhere.
So there's a variety of contributing factors to the sexual assault epidemic that we have. But what we're saying is that we're talking specifically about the church. We're not talking about Washington and Hollywood right now. We're talking about specifically the church, and specifically the church. One of those major contributing factors is this culture of purity culture.
And so you're saying it's theological. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for those who may not be aware of what purity culture means, it's essentially the sexual education, or really lack thereof, within the church that promotes abstinence, that really kind of cuts out any other kind of sexual education, and really says that sex has to exist within marriage only.
Within heterosexual marriage only.
Heterosexual marriage, yes, of course. So, of course, there are a lot of people that are left out by that. And also, and I think that this was a really important point that Rachel Virginia made on Twitter, is that there are definite racist undertones to purity culture as well, because the ideal woman does not just have a gentle and quiet spirit. She's also this, submissive, small, white, middle class. Like, I mean, if you even just look at the pictures in modesty books, which there are many of, you get this sense that there is only one specific kind of woman that is quote unquote correct. And not to say that, I mean, purity culture definitely exists for men as well. It seems a little bit more lax. I mean,
but I know so many men who have been harmed by purity culture insofar as like it like stunts them emotionally. It's the sense of like all relationships and all touch are sexualized. I don't know. Yeah. Purity culture definitely helps men or harms men as well. It's just, it harms us in unique ways, I guess.
Yeah.
Right.
As far as for the straight male experience there, like there are books like Every Young Man's Battle. And things like that.
So many men whose relationships have been harmed because of the things that they learned in purity culture. And I'm like, I feel bad for you. Like, that sucks. It sucks to feel that way. So that's kind of all the things that we were trying to explore with this, is like, okay, let's talk about the ways that purity culture informs the way that women and men and people of all genders understand their sexual experience, and how that could possibly lead in the church specifically to this kind of hushing of abuse, this gaslighting of abuse, this justification of abuse. And I think that's where we were really trying to get at, is like, okay, yes, obviously abuse happens everywhere. In the church specifically, abuse does happen, as it happens everywhere. And often in the church specifically, it is justified. It is explained away. It is kind of laughed off. It is put in the category of like, oh, well, this is just normal, or this is how God wants it, which adds, I think, another sinister layer to it. There's one thing to say, like, I'm abusing you, and there's another thing to say, like, I'm abusing you, and this is how God wants it, and he's okay with it.
Or abusers confess, and they're immediately forgiven without any concern for their victims at all. I mean, those are some of the stories that we're seeing on Church Too, is one in particular from Jamie Lee Finch. She mentioned that someone came forward in a church service and spoke about wanting to sexually abuse someone, and confessed it, and he was celebrated, for this, not considering the fact that his victim or desired victim was sitting in that congregation, and while I absolutely believe in forgiveness and redemption, I think that there's
that's
definitely
not how it works.
No, that's not how that works.
Yeah, that's like weird preemptive forgiveness of, and also traumatizing your potential victim.
Yeah,
it's trying to, that's fucked up.
Real.
So one of the things that ended up being, one of the tweets that I put out that was actually trying to promote Church Too and point back to you, it was both of you. There was like a 2-part tweet that said, follow this hashtag. And then the next one was like, I was like texting, messaging you both, like trying to find out like if you guys started this and everything. And then I said, follow these people. These are the ones that started it. But then you can't choose which of your tweets goes viral. And actually the one that was...
Don't you love that? Yep, like, don't you love when you tweet something and you're like,
It's
that's not
rude.
funny at all? And then it gets like 200 retweets. And then you tweet something that you're like, this is gold. This is like my premium content. And then like nobody cares.
Yes,
I hate
absolutely.
You get 5 likes.
You get 5 likes. And I'm like, you guys, that was gold.
You
That was
ingrates.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. So that one also got picked up in that Time article and was embedded in that Time article. And then what was a result of that is that I said this was about women that had been abused or assaulted. And then a number of people tweeted at me saying this affects men too. This affects boys too.
Yeah.
So that was like this weird,
Yeah.
this weird thing that just happened because that was the one that happened to get picked up and retweeted a lot. And it was completely not the intended consequence of that. So sorry if you had to clear that up a few times in the first couple of days.
It was, I mean, like, I think
but-
honestly, like, we all look at this and we go, like, people of all genders have been victims of the church's inability to come to terms with the sexual assault problem, right?
Right.
I mean, overwhelmingly, the victims are women and overwhelmingly the perpetrators are men. But that's not to say that it doesn't sometimes go the other way. And I think especially because purity culture puts on men this like unrealistic manliness sort of expectation, I think it does make it hard for male victims of assault and abuse to come forward. It makes it uniquely hard for them because it's like, because of the way that we structure our gender relationships in this like weird inorganic structure that
I think
passed down to us. So I'm like, overwhelmingly the victims have been women, but it's like I think every man or everyone of every gender who has been a victim of sexual assault should feel like they will be supported if they come forward. And I think purity culture makes it uniquely hard to feel that way because of the weird gender binary that it imposes on people and the weird expectations that come with that.
So let's talk a little bit about the people that have been sort of giving you blowback. You're sort of, there have been a few.
Did you know that Hannah and I are a lesbian and a yoga teacher?
I didn't. This is news to me.
It was crazy. I went to yoga for like 90 minutes and I came out and it was like, then I looked at my Twitter when I got out of class and it was like, oh, a lesbian and a yoga teacher. And I was like, well, I am a lesbian. I mean, wait, no, I am a yoga teacher. But
you were definitely the yoga teacher and I was the lesbian in this scenario.
You were the lesbian and I was the yoga teacher. And I'm like, well, I am a yoga teacher, but like, we're both bi. None of this is really correct.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, I have had a very strict internet rule of not feeding the trolls. Because it would mess too much with my emotional well-being in the past. But I think with church too, I really have taken on this new role of almost kind of a pastoral vibe towards those who are sharing, because I mean, purity culture, rape culture, abuse within the church are topics that I've been talking about and Emily has been talking about for half a decade. So that's not a new conversation to me. All of my bridges have already been burned. Like the ones that we're going to burn are burned. And
same.
I'm not worried about people reading something that I posted and being like, pearl clutching. But for a lot of people coming forward, this is their first time and they're putting their very vulnerable story out on a viral hashtag. They don't know who's going to see it. And yet they managed to put it out there, and like, that level of bravery and courage is absolutely astounding to me. And it's also something that I felt the need, as someone who had more experience with this topic, to be somewhat protective of. And so I think we started to notice the first few days were fairly quiet. And then we got about 3 or 4 days in and we got at least one major troll every day. I'm glad that there were not more than that, because it was difficult to take them on individually. Although I will
was busy.
say,
I was like trying to be on my like romantic anniversary trip with my husband, and I'd be like, sorry, let me stop having a beer with you at this romantic place to respond to this person who's calling me a yoga teacher and a lesbian. Sorry, I'll be right back.
I know. I was trying to take point for you, hon, but you can't help when you're being tagged.
No.
So I think, overwhelmingly the quote unquote trolls have been white evangelical male church leaders, which is really saddening to me and extremely unsurprising.
I would say almost exclusively.
Almost exclusively.
Yeah.
And that doesn't surprise me at all. I think that anyone who has had to endure any kind of marginalization within the church has more understanding for how something like Church 2 could be real. I'm thinking queer people, people of color, women, non-binary, transgender, just the whole spectrum of people who aren't white cis males can understand how something like this could occur. It's unfortunate, but I think I've been really grateful for the ways that we've been able to approach those people with firmness and also with empathy for the most part. I think the guy who said that we were a yoga teacher and a lesbian,
he wasn't gonna ever accept anything.
He wasn't gonna change his mind. But I really think that he was approached by all corners from people who were wanting to, maintain and care for victims and survivors, but also were, engaging him as a fellow human being.
I would say that is a really like a real kindness.
It is.
Like when someone steps in and is like, I'll fight with this person for you. That's a nice thing to do.
It really is. I've been thankful for it more than once this week.
Of like, thank you for dealing this, because I literally don't have the emotional energy to do this right now. But if you do, more power to you. Thank you. God bless.
And I will say that there have been some very long-suffering white cis male dudes who have jumped in the gap there. Yourself, one of them, Blake, who have sort of taken point on some of those conversations that, that survivors haven't wanted or felt the emotional bandwidth to finish.
Or been obligated to.
Right. Yeah. No one knows anyone an explanation. Yeah, and that's actually one of the things that I have found. Well, actually, there's a couple of things. First of all, what you mentioned as far as really these like straight white evangelical pastor types that seem to be just completely unable to actually hear the criticisms or even listen to the stories because they, for instance, feel that you are attacking the church, attacking Christ's body, and humiliating the church, and like how what do you think as far as like, okay, this is just this is just sort of like an open question, and it's something that I've been trying to think of relative to a number of different things from people that have been traumatized by churches. How can those particular institutions where abuse is prone to happen, how can they hope to change if they don't acknowledge that there's like a problem, that it's not fake news, that it's not like that there's both individual and institutional problems within these organizations, and within, again, kind of going back to what you said earlier, Hannah, about this being a theological problem.
And I think they can't hope to change, like, unless they're willing to acknowledge that. Like, on the one hand, like, okay, like, I hope that every conservative church out there in the world does prevention training with all of, like, I hope if you're the most conservative church in the world, you do prevention training with your volunteers, and you mandatory background check everybody who works with your kids, and you do, like, those are things that everybody can do, right? Like, I hope that you do that. I hope that no matter where you fall in the theological spectrum, you do that. However, though, like, at the end of the day, that's not enough, because at the end of the day, what we're not talking about is a failure to background check people. Like, sometimes, yeah, like, sometimes it's a failure to background check people, but that's just really like a symptom of the disease that we're speaking of, right?
Ultimately, we're trying to go to the root.
We're trying to go to the root.
Problem.
Background checking everyone isn't going to fix the problem that you're trying to fix. You should do it. Like, you should background check your volunteers. You should put all of your volunteers and your staff through prevention training. Those are things you should do. And everybody can do, regardless of where you fall on the theological spectrum. But ultimately, we're talking about a system that prioritizes men over against women and femme-identifying people, that prioritizes adults over children, that prioritizes white folks over black folks, that prioritizes people with privilege over people with less privilege. So, like, that's really what we're talking about, right? These, like, power dynamics that make abuse ripe to be harvested. And so, we can talk about the background checks all day long, and I hope that we do. I hope that everybody does background checks, but we're talking about a theological system here too. And I think that's kind of what's been hard for people to understand, is there's been a lot of pushback of, like, well, I'm a pastor and we do this. And I'm like, good, I'm glad that you do. Like, yay. But also, can we talk about the theological systems that reward and kind of turn the other cheek to these sorts of problems? Because, obviously sexual assault happens everywhere, but also we're talking about a unique problem within the church. And I think Church 2 is proof that there is a unique problem within the church, that it's not just a few bad apples. So. You had things also to say, Hannah.
Yeah. About the theological framework there, I think that it's really easy to sort of address behavior, and I think that that's something that the evangelical church sort of leans toward, is changing behavior, quick fixes, instead of addressing the root. And I think that is something that what we're seeing is that obviously people in power who are church leaders are definitely to blame, but a lot of the people in the Church 2 hashtag were abused by partners, significant others, and then those situations were silenced within the church. So,
or even like volunteers. I read this one tag where it was like, did you know that only 170 pastors were prosecuted last year for abuse? And I was like, do you know how many of the churches, how many of the stories on Church 2 are not talking about pastors who were officially employed by the church? Like, you can't just take the number of pastors that were prosecuted last year for abuse and use that as some kind of evidence. Most of us are not talking about pastors. Some of us are, certainly. But, like, we're talking about deacons, we're talking about youth volunteers, we're talking about, like, you know, it's all these attempts to justify, which frankly just kind of go to show, like, where your priorities really lie.
But when churches put the onus for sexual purity on the person being quote unquote lusted after versus the person who is doing the lusting, then that is ripe fodder for abuse, because, you know, specifically men start to think, well, I can't help it. You know, this is just the way that I am. I'm just a visual person. And you know what? Like, that is really honestly rude to men, to treat them like some kind of, you know, beast that can't process clearly, you know, what to do with their sexual impulses. And also, it's patently false that it's only men who experience, like, visual sexual attraction. That's bull. But when we start to put the onus on the victim, while at the same time, and this is what boggles my mind, is that we, within evangelical, like, complementarian theology, we are supposed to believe that men are protectors, providers, authority, regardless of what role they play, whether they're our husband, our boyfriend, our pastor, our youth group leader, our small group leader. I mean, all of these roles that men are supposed to fill are seen as authority figure positions. And so, it really, I don't know, it presents ripe fodder for abusive power situations to take place.
Mm-hmm. And it's more than likely the result of one of the root reasons why white male pastors are threatened by the hashtag, because they see it as it's essentially a reclamation of authority over your own experience.
Well, and there's two things to say about that too that I think is like, okay, number one, there's been a lot of like pushback of like, these people are not even like a part of the church and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, number one, that's not true. We've been a part of the church our whole life. I teach Sunday school. Number two, it shouldn't matter. Like, I think that's really the real moral of the story is like, we shouldn't have to present our pedigree, like our evangelical pedigree for our critiques to be valid.
Right.
At the end of the day, you need to like evaluate people's claims based on their truthfulness and not on like the perceived validity of their source. So like, I could be like the most atheist person in the world, but like if what I'm saying is true, you need to listen to it, right? Like it shouldn't matter that I teach Sunday school. Like,
But unfortunately,
like,
within the evangelical church, though, there's definitely this understanding that anyone who is apostate, anyone who is outside of the church walls, so to speak, is somebody who can be immediately discounted.
Because their heart is clearly in the wrong place because their opinion doesn't matter anymore.
They were never saved anyway.
Yeah.
I mean,
and so the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked, and they're just looking for a reason to hate God and the church. And it's the most untrue thing in the whole world, but it's a very convenient excuse for why not to listen to survivors of abuse.
Yeah. I want to go down a similar thing there as well, as far as the ways in which people try to engage conversations with those that do not have a comfortable place within evangelicalism. So again, people of color, LGBTQ people, those sorts of people that are legitimately threatened within their sense of identity by evangelical theology, by particular groups or places, and I think one of the critiques and types of critiques I've seen lobbied against you and other people that are talking about these issues on the hashtag is this sense that, come talk to my church, I want to have this dialogue with you, come talk to us, but come talk to us on
I will though if you pay me dollars. Hannah and I are both very available for booking to come to your church.
We are for hire.
Yes.
We are for hire. However, I think the situation in particular that you're referencing, Blake.
I'm being very oblique, but we can.
You are. Bless your heart. In the specific situation that you mentioned, it was one of these situations where the conference in question was already completely booked. I mean, yes. you can see their website, you can see their lineup online, and it is almost entirely white cis men, and with one black.
There was one black man, and
rapper.
there was a panel on women of some sort, and that
were there women on the panel?
I don't know if there was one on the panel. It didn't say.
There's no saying.
It wasn't specific.
But somebody had tagged us saying, "Oh, Emily and Hannah are must hire speakers for this conference."
And I was like, "Oh, thanks, friend. That's really sweet." But also, they're literally never going to ask us.
No, we would not at all be the choices for that. So as that conversation progressed, one of the one of the organizers of that conference reached out to us and said, we'd love to have you. And it just sort of spun into this conversation where it became clear that some really key foundations were not there in terms of how we would be able to have that conversation. I mean, I am more than willing to have dialogue with people who may not have my exact same views. I mean, hell, I'm somebody who has almost
it's kind of what we do all day long.
Yeah, I've almost completely left the church, and yet I am advocating for and fighting for people within the church. I mean, I spend most of my life working with people who don't exactly agree with me. That's not the problem here. But the problem in this specific scenario was that we were asked to speak and basically give reasons for why we should be able to exist within the church, because one of the major presenters and one of the ideologies of that particular organization is that anything other than complete heterosexuality is against God. And so for people, for queer women, that's 100% not a safe scenario to walk into. I don't need to walk onto your platform and tell you why I should be allowed to exist.
Why I'm not sinning and going to hell. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
and also I'm really busy. Like, my friends are dying.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have time. I'm trying to provide care to my friends and provide hope to people on the journey. Like, I don't have time to go backwards and be like, please let me tell you why. Like, let me come here and argue about my right to exist, or even argue. I mean, I don't know, pick something else, pick some other topic. I don't need to come argue about some other topic that doesn't have to do with my sexuality, because I'm who I am as a person in holisticness is not welcome here.
Well, and I think ultimately our job, I think it's really easy growing up within the church to gain kind of this savior complex where, if anybody reaches out to you, it's like, oh, I got to save this person. I got to change their mind. But no, all that will do is make you lose your own sanity. And so for me, I have had to realize that I'm not here to change anyone's mind. I'm here to present a framework for equity to those whose minds are already changing. And they're out there. We're seeing
and I'm going to do my darndest, and there's people that work is totally 100% worth it towards, I will do my darndest to help people on that path. But there's other people where I'm like, this is not my calling.
Yeah. And
that's kind of the
situation.
situation.
To be jealous of your time.
Yeah.
You have to protect your time and your emotional labor, because
my time and my emotional labor is valuable emotionally. It's valuable monetarily. It's valuable spiritually. All these things matter. And so what do I want to do with the precious time that I have? And so we were I kind of feel uncomfortable about this. And, with all the church too stuff kind of just blowing up, we're just trying to kind of be selective and careful about what we do. And so yeah, so there's a lot of, I don't know, it's separate, but it's not separate, they're different issues, but they're not different issues, because ultimately what we're talking about is men who can't take no for an answer. Kind of.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That could be the title of my life movie.
Men who
that's fine.
No for an answer.
Men who can't take no for an answer.
Yeah, but that's ultimately what we're talking about.
Yes.
Not exclusively, but by and large.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about that because it's one significant example. If you're on Twitter and you follow Hannah and Emily, it happened there. So it's a significant example.
It's a trip. We have a good time. Yeah. Join us. It's a party.
Definitely. They are solid follows. Very solid follows. So
I feel like everybody's going to be really disappointed because I got 400 followers overnight from church too. And I was like, man, they're going to be super disappointed when I start live tweeting the Kardashians.
You know what? That's
Or
what.
The Bachelor.
I contain multitudes.
That's right. That's right. And that's what Twitter is for, multitudinal personalities. Because
Yeah.
Real.
yeah,
Very real.
because I mean, you can enjoy my evangelical threads and also my hot takes on wearing a red shirt to Target.
But
So,
I think
Don't
like,
do that,
you're on-
Blake. That's a bad
when you're on
choice.
Twitter, people expect you to be like nothing but like an encyclopedia of knowledge, and it's like, I am a human being. Like, let me tweet about The Bachelor.
I
Yeah.
have problematic faves, okay, that I
Yes.
want to talk about, okay?
Like,
Let me be a
I know
person.
that all of my favorite movies are terrible. Just let me like them.
It's real. They're
Yeah.
so bad. Emily has the worst movie taste. Never listen to her.
It's fine. I'm okay with it.
She's proud of it, okay?
Yeah.
She's proud of it.
I've come to terms.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah. So, but it was that particular conversation that unfolded on Twitter.
Mhm.
It was very, it just seemed to be a very good example, like you said, of people trying to a certain type of person trying to frame what's happening within their own terms, and if it doesn't fit those terms, then being prone to rejecting it, if not outright rejecting it. And then, just that is one of the things that does sort of tie into that question I asked about how these institutions, these behaviors can change if people, but I mean, when these people fail to listen to the stories that are being told through church too. That's sort of, I don't really have it. I mean, I don't really know if there's anything to say other than that for me. But that's what I'm just as an observer. That's what I've seen both of you tackle with a lot of grace. So
church too is not an attack on church. And I think that's what it's been misread as, that we're somehow trying to take down the church. And what I will differentiate there is that we're absolutely trying to take down evangelicalism. And what's sad about this whole conversation is that evangelicals have so fused their identity with their theology that it's impossible to question. It's impossible to
so you're like, everything's connected. It's a brick wall. It's like I can't give up my idea in X without my entire theology.
And so they feel threatened that we're somehow trying to dismantle them or their faith, and that's not it at all. I would love to be able to see congregations that can embrace a fully embodied intersectional theology, but that is hard work, and there's a lot of deconstruction involved there on the front end, and that's sort of what Emily and I are trying to do. It has nothing to do with the hatred for the church. I mean, my God, like we've dedicated our entire professional and adult lives to the church.
No, and I think the church has a lot of clout. It has a lot of resources. It has a lot of manpower. Like, it could be such a force for good in the world. And in a lot of ways is. There's so many sectors in which religious people motivated for a cause do amazing stuff, and I'm just like, can we mobilize that in other places?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important to mention that there are so many people that live in this strange no man's land in between Christianity and atheism. I think there's a lot of people who have come out of the church who don't feel that is their home anymore. Yeah. And yet they, there's this whole like rebel trope within evangelicalism that like, if you've rejected the faith, you're just a rebel, and you never loved God anyway, and all of
Raise your hand if you were a problem child.
Well, I mean, hi. Here I am.
Well, here
I am with my tube of red lipstick. But I think there's a lot of people that live in that margin a lot more than we've accounted for. People who are very interested in returning to some form of faith or spirituality, but who feel that The church as it exists currently is not a safe space for them. And those are my people, like, because that's me too. I mean, I absolutely, I have, the evangelical pedigree, and yet I don't know where I belong. I definitely don't think I belong in any sort of like organized congregation. Although I'm happy to go to yours and tell you how to not religious traumatize people.
Right.
But I think that it's really important to acknowledge that there is a whole host. And I mean, that's what you do, Blake. I mean, that's what ex-evangelical is that it's a space for those of us who live in that no man's land to say, hey, I'm here. I am spiritual. I want to be able to build some sort of semblance of faith or theology or spirituality.
Well, so that was one of the most like sidebar. That was one of the most frustrating parts about the Church 2 #2 was there was a whole bunch of like super hardcore like God delusion atheists who jumped on there too, who were like, oh, your whole problem is that you believe in a mythical sky being. And
religion sucks.
If you would stop believing in a mythical sky being, you wouldn't be abused. And it was like, okay, that's not like really...
deeply unhelpful, friend.
That's deeply unhelpful.
Yeah.
Like, I don't really frankly care if you're an atheist or an agnostic or a deist. Like, this is not the most important thing to me. But if you're about to jump on here and be like, oh, the problem is that you are a deist, and like I don't know, there's just a lot of, I was like, I'm almost as mad at those people as I was at the guy calling us a lesbian and a yoga teacher. I was like, as far as I'm concerned, you guys are both on my shit list right now. Like,
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of gaslighting people who are still in the church or who are harmed by the church. Like, well, it was your bad for getting in there in the first place. Like, if you weren't so stupid.
So many smart, wonderful, brilliant people who are still in the church, who are still very much Christians, who still believe the things, who are doing so much good work. And to me, it bothered me deeply.
It's lazy. It's intellectually lazy.
It's like, because you're chalking things up, and I'm like, I'm not saying we don't need to talk about like the theology inherent here. Like, we need to flesh these things out and what that really means pragmatically. Like, I get it, but also it's very lazy. And yeah, is frankly a little elitist. So, anyway, yeah. That was a sidebar that I wanted to make. That people who are saying, "Oh, you just need to give up belief in all religion," were just as problematic to me as lesbian and yoga teacher, pastor.
I mean,
whatever.
it's fine to believe that. It's fine to believe that, but also don't force that on other people.
You can't come onto this hashtag where people are sharing their stories of abuse and be like, "Oh, that's because
you're bad for being Christian.
You're bad for being." Yeah, it's like. That's not really my most important thing. I'm not invested in the outcome of this insofar as I'm not invested in people being atheist or agnostic or Christian or staying in the church or leaving the church. I really don't care. There's a lot of people on the tag who are even like, don't let this be a reason for leaving the church. And I was like, leave it. If you need to leave it, leave it. I'm not invested in people staying in the church or leaving the church. I'm invested in people being healthy, holistic, like beings who love themselves and love others. If that looks like staying, stay.
Yeah.
And there's not one pat answer for that.
Like, that's every individual's person. I don't know. To me, I don't like the one size fits all approach, because it's like, you got to figure out what you got to do for you that is going to be the thing that leads you to being the most healthy, holistic person that you can be, that loves yourself and loves others and feels connected to the universe, feels connected to God, like feels spiritually whole. That's going to look different for you than it is for me, and that's okay.
Right. Yeah.
Cosign.
Yeah.
The fundamentalist that wants you to give your life to the flying spaghetti monster is just as bad as the one that wants you to give your life to Jesus.
Yeah. I'm like, can we just let each other be people? Can we just let each other figure our shit out? Like, God.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm completely agree. And like,
to me, that's also like, I also don't care like where you are, like,
Yeah.
like, and whether you're in
It's just
line
not
with the things
important to
that, no, right. It's the thing that's important is wholeness over holiness. Like, if
Oh
you're,
my God. Yeah.
if you're a whole person, just
Oh,
like,
put that on a t-shirt, Blake. I'll buy that one.
all right,
I
you
would wear
got
that t-shirt.
it. So yeah, just exactly what you're saying, Emily. It's that
Yeah.
if you're holistic, if you feel complete, that's the thing that if God exists, that's probably what they want for you.
I'm pretty sure they care about that more than anything.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, like you've mentioned before, it's very conflicting to say, you know, that you're excited about something that has people's abuse as a central part of it. But that's again, that's not all it is, which is what makes it a conflicted and complicating thing. It's also this empowering thing that you've given over to Twitter, and it's this. It's a
Well, it's kind of its
vehicle.
own thing now. Like the first few days you babysit it and you're like, okay, I'm going to take care of this and like guide it. And then at a certain point, it sort of becomes its own thing.
Sure.
Of like, okay, people are using this in a way that is organic and sort of separate from me now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like it's flown out of the Twitter nest and, you know, into the whatever. But so as far as like that being a conflicting thing, and it's definitely something that this conversation that you started, the two of you started, where would you sort of like the conversations to keep happening? And if there's, I know you're already, I mean, there's probably, there's so many things. And I think, you know, I think that both of you are well suited to this work, and that, and I mean, you can hear the, like,
this is all I can do.
This is
literally, but frankly, this is literally what we've been preparing to do since
it's true. It's true.
Purity Culture Rehab Project, we have been preparing ourselves for this. Like this has been kind of our whole thing. So on the one hand, it's difficult. Like when we were on Teen Vogue, we both had this moment of like, this sucks. Like this is terrible that this is what it took. That it took all of these people sharing all of these horrifying things. That it took, you know, ourselves coming forward with our own stories that are really deeply painful and personal. Like it sucks that that's what it took, but also it was sort of this cathartic experience of like, we've been working really hard for this. Like we've been having this conversation in 18 million different ways.
For the last 5 years.
Longer than that, you know, like since we became friends, like, so on the one hand, it's like, it's difficult and it's hard. And it's like, wow, this really sucks that like, this is what it had to come to. But on the other hand, it is sort of like this experience of like a lot of really hard work, you know, sort of paying off in this moment of like all of us being able to come together, because like, now's the time, right? Like this is the moment where we're having this like really weird cultural moment where this is a thing that people do, right? Where people get on the internet and talk about their sexual abuse. And this is a
hallelujah, because
this is a cultural moment that we're having, and it's great. And somebody asked me the other day if I thought that it was a thing that was going to lead to long-term change, and I was like, I don't know. We'll see. Like I want to be hopeful. I'm not a necessarily optimistic person as a personality, but I want to believe that like the critical mass that we're experiencing right now is going to lead to a long-term societal change. I think that's up to us.
This conversation is going to lead to long-term societal change.
Yeah.
Okay. Like I'm speaking that into existence.
Yeah.
I'm a deeply more optimistic person than Emily. But I sincerely believe that. And honestly, like for me, I would love to see an entire theological overhaul. So purity culture is just one piece to that in my mind. I think that we need to approach systemic racism within the church. I think we need to approach queer phobia. I think we need to approach capitalism. I think that those are all topics that have really infiltrated the church theologically in harmful ways. And that is ultimately my goal, is to get at all of those roots. I need to like slow myself down and like take it a little bit at a time, because I'm like raring to go, you know, but
Yeah. I know that feeling. Sure.
Yes. But those are all pieces of the conversation that need to transpire. And I think that not everyone is ready to have it, but enough people are ready to have it that
I think Church 2 is evidence of that.
Absolutely.
Church 2 is evidence. It's evidence that people are ready to have that conversation as a result of like this super weird, but frankly kind of great and terrible and awful conversation that we are having nationally right now. So it's like, where do you go from here? I mean, like, so people have asked that a lot. Like, what do you want churches to do? And I'm like, on the one hand, I want every church to do the practical things, right? Like, on the one hand, I want every church to have the sexual abuse policy and to do the training and to do the background checks. Do all of that. Like, do that yesterday. On the other hand, it's like, where we go from here is we really need to dismantle these things at the root, right? So like, one of the worst contributors to this Church 2 situation that we have is purity culture. And that's the belief that the only acceptable sexual expression is one man, one woman for life in a heterosexual marriage, and abstinence before marriage, and everything else is sin, right? If you're committed to that, I don't know how helpful you can be. That's kind of like, it's sort of like a hard truth of like, well, if you're not willing to dismantle purity culture, like, okay, sure. Like, you can do background checks on your volunteers. That's great. That's a thing that you should do. But like, ultimately you're putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. You know, that's like hard. That's a hard thing to say. It's hard to be like, well, it's not good enough, but it's not, you know, like, you should do those things, but ultimately we have to talk about, okay, what is the backdrop that is making these situations possible? Because it's not like if you did background checks, this would never happen, because a lot of people, most abusers don't have backgrounds. Most abusers don't have prior convictions. Like, so you could background check everyone.
Well, and unfortunately, at the very root of purity culture is a hatred and fear of the human body.
My God.
I think that we have espoused quite a lot of like Gnosticism into evangelicalism, which says that we are just supposed to be disembodied spirits and brains, and we're just, you know, moving through the world.
Frankly, why I became a yoga teacher in the first place. Thank you, Twitter pastor. That's exactly why I'm a yoga teacher, because of the disembodiment of evangelicalism.
And there's so much, I think, I mean, this is a whole entire other conversation, but as I'm like studying religious trauma, and really any kind of trauma, is that it's stored within the body. And so that there's, we really have to start to reconcile the connection between our, whatever you want to call it, your soul, your mind, back with your body, because that's what you live in. You know, that
the only thing that you have.
Really? Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I could go off there. That's a whole nother conversation to have, and we should definitely have it.
Oh my God. Yeah. We could do a whole episode on Gnosticism and anti-bodiness in conservative Christianity. But ultimately, yeah, it's that situation of like, okay, you should do the practical things, but we have to talk about what is actually leading to the situation that we have. And so, I mean, where people want to go from there, like, start dismantling purity culture, start dismantling rape culture, start dismantling white supremacy, start dismantling colonialism. Like, take all of your sacred idols and examine them. Like, hold them up to the light, turn them around, be honest about the pragmatic outcomes of these doctrines that you hold so dear, and see how they are coming to fruition in death for so many people. And then once you are aware of that, make changes. Don't teach that anymore. Like, unlearn that teach your staff to unlearn it, like teach others to unlearn it, paint a new way forward. And I get that it's all very high and lofty, and you know, it's a lot harder said than done, or it's a lot harder done than said, but it's a situation of like, you can't have this canon of untouchable doctrine if you want to fix things, where you put everything that can't be questioned over here. And then, well, here's the things we can ask questions about, but this stuff is untouchable. No, like, is what you're saying there in that situation is that there's doctrine that is worth more to me than people's lives, than people's souls.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that is where a lot of evangelicals land. But the good news is that not all of them. And
and that's the work we're doing, essentially, is that, that's the work we're doing.
Church too exists for those who are willing to question and consider that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good place to be, because I mean, that's also what I, you know, hope to make possible for people that listen to this show, that if they're questioning, then they have you as examples in this conversation of people that have questioned and have gone through that process and have come out the other side in a better place, even though despite all the pain, like where you are now, is in a healthier place than where you came from.
Well, and it's sort of like, you know, like when you're in school and the teacher asks a question and nobody says anything, and it's like crickets, crickets, crickets. Mm-hmm. And then one person answers the question. And then all of a sudden it's like a floodgate. Then everybody else feels like they can talk.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And it's like, I think that's kind of the space that we're trying to stand in for a lot of people who are coming out of evangelicalism, is like, we're going to answer the question. Like, here we are. We'll just be the first person to raise our hand. And if that makes somebody else feel like they can raise their hand, like, ultimately that is the best gift.
That's worth it.
Is making somebody else feel like they can also raise their hand and say something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's powerful. That's incredibly powerful. And it's incredibly timely in a nation where right now there's someone in a neck and neck race. One of someone that's a civil rights lawyer, and the other is a sexual predator.
Well, honestly, the whole Roy Moore situation is, I think, ultimately what caused me to feel like it was time for me to come forward, because I was like, if we're talking about details, technically speaking, my abuser was also a man in his 30s who thought that he was dating teenagers. You know? Yeah. And it's like, at the end of the day, like, that's literally what we're talking about right now. So, like, I have a very vested personal interest in this, because I'm like, I was that person.
Yeah.
I was that person that Roy Moore was trying to date. And I feel very personally connected to all of these people who are saying, oh, well, it was so many years ago, or, oh, he asked permission, or, oh, it was a different time. And, and it's just not.
Yeah. Yep. God damn. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
I've been talking
I'm
about it a lot the last couple of weeks, so it's I'm a little bit less emotional about it than I was. I'm also a 5 on the Enneagram, so
let me know when you want to do the Enneagram episode, Blake.
There's a little bit of attachment. Oh my God, yes, Hannah, you have to do an Enneagram episode. That would be so great.
Enneagram, that's what's up.
Yeah, I went on the Twisted Sistered show, and they gave me an Enneagram test on the air. So.
What did you come as?
Well, they thought before that I would be 9, but they thought I would be I guess I was like a 2 or something. I don't know. I'm still, usually when I've done the tests and all that stuff, I'm somewhere between like the numbers that come up are 4, 5, 6, and 9.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you gotta read the descriptions. I feel like the tests are useful, but it's more about what you identify.
The tests are trash.
They give you a jumping off point. Like, if you take a test, you can, like, oh, maybe I start here, and then you go and read the descriptions. But it's really, I don't know. It's more about what you identify with, because
Yeah,
what your
for sure.
basic fears and motivations are.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
fine. This is a different episode, okay?
This is a different episode, but I'm so curious, though. I really am deeply curious. Anyway,
Yeah.
all of that to say, yeah, Roy Moore is trash, and
Yeah.
it is what
She
it
brings
is.
it back.
Yeah. But no, on that note, like, seriously though, like that's the conversation that we're having nationally right now, is like,
Right.
should we put a pedophile in office because he will vote pro-life? And I mean, frankly, we already had that conversation a year ago,
Right.
and America said yes. So, like,
81% of evangelicals said yes.
yeah, said yes. Well, yeah. So I'm not
trying to vomit on air here.
No,
Blake,
and I'm
okay,
I'm not hella hopeful. But I want to be clear that that's the level of conversation that we're at.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just, well, I would say that's discouraging, very discouraging, but what you're doing is encouraging. And it's the counterpoint to that crazy, insane reality, is that by empowering the victims' stories in the way that you have, you've legitimated them, and I think that's such good work, and I'm very happy to be able to highlight it in the show and elsewhere on Twitter and everywhere else.
Well, and I want to be super clear too that, like, we're a freaking conduit. You know what I'm saying? Like, everybody's been so freaking brave. Like, everybody has had so much bravery and so much courage in, like, coming forward. And it's like, so yeah, so we tweeted out a hashtag and stuff, but it's like, people,
this belongs to everyone.
This belongs to everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, this belongs to everyone who has tweeted on Church Too. I mean, frankly, this belongs to everyone who has tweeted on Me Too, who built the foundation for this. Like, this belongs to everyone. And so I think, like, I don't know.
Yeah,
you know, like,
Me Too is where I told my story originally.
We're comparing notes, friends. Like,
right.
There's power in comparing notes.
Yeah. Well, I want to be sensitive to your time and everything. Was there anything else that I didn't really touch on, or that we haven't talked about, that you want to bring up relative to this, or anything else that we haven't talked about that you just want to get out there?
I think we ranted at you.
Yeah, no, we ranted. We'll come to your place. Yes. Hannah and I will both come to your place.
You are listening to this.
This is a real thing. We will come to your church or to your school for some dollars. You can email
reasonable
us.
Amounts of dollars.
Yeah.
Yes.
But our whole thing is, we want to make this conversation available. We want to make it accessible, and we both have our own stories. We want to share those, but yeah, this is a thing that we care a lot about, and intersects with a lot of our most important values that we've been working on for a lot of years. And so, it sucks that, like, this is the case, right? But this is a super important thing, and we've been talking for a long time about how purity culture is damaging. And I think Church Too is an important part of highlighting that, and of saying, like, we're not alone. Like, the people who have experienced these sort of things, it's not an isolated incident. It's not a bad apple. It's not, this one weird occurrence. Like, it's a result of individual bad choices, but it's also a result of systemic injustice. And so,
and also, we're starting, Church 2 events are starting to happen. So,
there's one in Phoenix.
There's one in Phoenix next week, December 12th at 7 p.m. Gosh, I forget the name of the venue right now. But if you would like to know more about it, find me on Twitter at Hannah Paasch. That's Paasch. And I'll be happy to give you the details to that. And we're looking to host quite a few of these in different cities around the country. So we're talking about Nashville, Atlanta, if that's something that you're interested in having in your own town, whether that's, having people come and speak about it, whether it's just hosting an open mic where people can get up and share, or anonymous stories, anonymous submissions can be read aloud. All of those are options, and all of those are things that we are looking to facilitate. So holler at us.
Great. Yeah.
We're around.
Well, Emily,
we're probably fighting with someone that you know on Twitter.
That's where you'll find us.
Great. Yeah. Emily and Hannah, thanks so much for coming on and talking about this.
Yeah, thank you for having us. For real.
Happy to do it. We love Exvangelical.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.